Hello, everyone. Thank you to our live participants for joining us, and welcome to those of you watching for our recording. My name is Adya Mittal. I am an executive coordinator. What is going on with me? Coordinator for UBC Psychi's external team, and I'll be your host for today's event. Before we continue, however, I would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. Some of us may not be physically on campus, but UBC Psychi operates on UBC's infrastructure, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. If you'd like, please add your land acknowledgement to the chat. Um, Today's event in the Psychi's Expert Talk series is one Psychi is one of the largest international honor societies in the world, with the purpose of providing academic and professional development opportunities for our students. In service of this goal, we here at UBC chapter have developed the Expert Talk series, a bi-weekly event where we invite professionals in the field of psychology, cognitive science, or behavioral neuroscience to share their advice, experiences, and insight with the UBC students in those fields. Today's talk will feature Sania Chaudhry, who is an alumnus of UBC's psychology program. She also received her Juris Doctor with a social justice specialization from UBC. She's currently a conduct counsel at the Real Estate Council of Alberta in Calgary, where she practices in administrative and regulatory prosecutions. Prior to that, she practiced in Calgary in family, immigration, and employment law. She's also currently working on her LLM part-time, focusing on applying critical race theory in administrative law, particularly in regards to racial bias in immigration decisions. Sania is on the board of multiple organizations serving diverse lawyers, a board director of the Center for Sexuality, and a peer support mentor with the Alberta Lawyers Assistance Society. Sania's op-ed highlighting intersectionality and mental health in the legal profession, touching on her own experiences with Islamophobia and racialized and gendered microaggressions, was recently published in the Globe and Mail. Sania has been vocal about work-life balance and mental health for women in racialized lawyers, making concrete recommendations for systematic regulatory and law firm level change will be adopted. She was named by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation as one of 2022's top 30 under 30 for this work. In today's presentation, titled How an Undergrad in Psychology Can Shape a Career in Law, Sania will be sharing her journey from psychology to law. I would now like to remind our participants that if at any time during the talk you have any questions for Sania, please type them into the chat or feel free to raise your hand and we will address them right away. I will be monitoring the chats myself. Now with the formalities out of the way, finally, I would like to hand it over to our speaker, Sania Chaudhry. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Good morning, and thank you for that amazing, warm introduction. And thank you for having me speak today. My name is Sania Chaudhry, as you heard. Before I begin my talk, I'd like to just do a land acknowledgement for Calgary. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I wish to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Calgary, which is on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Stoney Nakoda nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all the peoples who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So Adya already introduced me. So basically, I'll just go straight into it. I'll begin by talking about my undergraduate in psychology, and then I'll move to talking about how I applied to law school, how my psychology degree impacted my law school experience, and further my legal career. So in terms of my undergraduate degree in psychology, so I got a Bachelor of Arts in 2014 in psychology and sociology, so I double majored. I was very interested in psychology and sociology after taking them in first year of undergrad, and I decided to focus on both of them for the rest of my undergrad. And so I always knew I wanted to apply to law school. Like I knew since elementary school that I wanted to be a lawyer. But you need an undergrad degree before you can apply to law school. And the advice to anyone really who's thinking of applying to law school is to take an undergraduate degree in whatever interests you and whatever you enjoy and are passionate about, because the law schools don't really care what your undergraduate degree is in. They just care what your grades are from that degree. And if you choose something that you really enjoy, then you'll get good grades. So with that logic, I did my undergrad in psychology and sociology, I had a strong interest in childhood psychology courses, social psychology courses, gender psychology, behavioral psychology, and I took just one cognitive neuroscience course. Um, Throughout all of that, I volunteered at 2 different psychology labs at UBC. So I don't remember what their names, or I don't know what their names are now, but when I was volunteering there, they were called one was the UBC Parenting Lab, and the other was the UBC Culture, Cognition, and Evolution Lab, or maybe just Culture and Cognition Lab. So I volunteered at both of those throughout. At the parenting lab, I transcribed observation videos, and at the culture lab, I actually ran studies with participants. And this was actually really helpful in developing communication skills and people skills, which is very important for law. Um, I also worked during my undergrad, and I don't know if UBC still has this, but the work study program. So under the work study program with the UBC Stigma and Resilience Among Vulnerable Youth Center, which is a department in the UBC nursing department at UBC Hospital. And basically I was a research assistant there and took an interdisciplinary approach into analyzing the mental health, physical health, and academic outcomes of sexual minority youth and the policy level determinants of these. So what, policies in schools, if they had an impact on these outcomes, if larger level policies, in the area they were, had an impact on these outcomes. I also did some other interesting work there on analyzing how the media covers and what words they use about sexually exploited youth. So I did a discourse analysis on that. Um, and it was just the perfect work opportunity for me during my undergrad because it was a good marriage between the social sciences and law, really. So that worked out really well. And I also volunteered at the West Coast Legal Education and Action Fund just to keep that interest in law going and to get some, real life experience with seeing legal advocacy in action. And I also volunteered with the AMS Food Bank of UBC, given my own reliance on food banks when I was a kid. So all of this stuff during undergrad, it really confirmed in me my passion for mental health, but also my passion for law and using the law to impact society. So, I always wanted to go into law school, but this confirmed to me that yes, I did want to go into law school. So I wrote my LSAT. So basically the way the application process works is you have to write a standardized test, so like the US has the SATs or like the MCAT for medical school. We write the LSAT. So I wrote my LSAT, applied to just UBC because my fail-safe was that if I don't get into UBC law, then I will just do a master's in either psychology or sociology. So I did my LSAT, applied to UBC. Thankfully I got in. So during law school, I noticed right away how my undergrad degree had an impact. So when I was in seminar courses where we write more papers and have more discussions and get marked on participation and all that, I was able to offer a different perspective than the other students in the class, given my psychology background and given the type of psychology courses I took and the type of volunteering I did. So I would often, write papers on or, raise my hand and give contributions on the intersections of different identities and their impact on mental health and how the law affects that and, give a different perspective. And that, served me well in those seminar courses, definitely. It also helped me set my focus in law school on what I really wanted to do in law once I leave law school. So during law school, I also volunteered a lot. I volunteered at the UBC Law Review, which is an academic peer-reviewed journal, and at Legal Advice Clinic, just get experience dealing with clients a little bit. And I worked throughout at the Canadian Journal of Family Law and the summers at the Workers' Compensation Board of BC. These work experience and my psychology background, made me realize that really what I want to do is family and immigration law, given that those are the areas of law where there's more intersections with mental health. So, there's often in both areas of law, there's often issues with trauma and, other mental health issues. And also I just really liked family and immigration law when I took them in law school. I felt like they were the most, helping people type of law for me at least. Um, and given my personal experiences as well, I have a strong affinity to family and immigration law. So with that in mind, after I graduated from law school, I moved to Calgary to be with my husband and searched for an articling position. So the way it works is after you graduate law school, you have to article or do a practicum with a law firm. Paid, hopefully. Most of them are paid, but sometimes you might end up being desperate and have to take a volunteer one. But thankfully, mine was paid. But you have to article for a year, and then you get called to the bar. It's different in different provinces. So I know when I went to law school in BC, the system was you article for 8 months, and then for 4 months you take the PLTC course, which is the bar exam course, and you write the bar exam. In Alberta, where I articled and where I am now, it's you article for the whole year, and simultaneously you take the CPLED course, which is their bar exam course, and you do assignments. I think it's every week or something like that. You do assignments, and then there's a couple of in-person sessions where you have to demonstrate your skills. Like you have to demonstrate dealing with a client interview, or making an argument in court, or doing a negotiation with another lawyer. So anyways, so with that context, so when I was searching for articling in a city that had no connections in, I noticed again right away that my undergraduate degree set me apart, because the way I did it, given that I had no connections, I knew I wanted to go into family and immigration law, and I knew I didn't want to go to a big firm. So I knew I wanted a small or medium-sized firm. So I sent emails out to 160 firms, just giving them a blurb about this is me, and attaches my resume, and I'd love to meet, even if there isn't a job offer, right? Like, let's get to know each other. And so I noticed in all those like coffees that I was having with people, that I piqued the interests of law firms with my volunteer experiences and my undergraduate degree in psychology. I had published a couple of papers as well. So they would often talk about the papers, and they would often talk about, well, what did you do at that interdisciplinary research center? You know what I mean? Like that was what interested them about me. It set me apart, and I was different from the other people who were reaching out to them. So thankfully, I landed an articling position. When I began articling, I also noticed how my background in psychology helped. So I articled at a firm that was a small firm that did general practice, but mostly focused on family law. Um, so what you don't know about law when you're in law school is that it's not just having good legal skills and being able to analyze and problem solve and uh, you know work hard. It's a lot of it is client management and dealing with people's emotions. So you have to be able to set boundaries with your clients, but also help them navigate kind of the worst time in their life. And you have to deal with difficult opposing counsel very often, especially as a racialized woman lawyer. It happens more to us. uh, so my psychology degree helped me with clients. First of all, most like lawyers I would talk to would talk about, oh, these clients are just crazy. They're so emotional. I can't get through to them. They're not listening to me. But with me, I knew from my psychology degree how to deal with that. So, I did active listening. I was empathetic, and I mirrored them when they spoke, and, I would let them get it out. And then I would help them piece through it and be like, okay, this is what you're feeling. Um, but this is what the law is. My job is to problem solve for you legally, and these are your legal options. So if you come in telling me you want sole custody of your client, I've heard your facts of your child. I've heard your facts. You're not going to get sole custody. The courts are very, very it's very rare for them to give sole custody unless there's like a security threat to the child. So you're gonna have to be okay with a joint custody result, but I can get you limitations on visitation for if you want primary time with your child. So that way, like just being able to explain things in not so much of like a technical way, but technical, but also like acknowledging their emotions. Um, and you know, opposing counsel also, there's a lot of, like, I faced a lot of racial and gendered microaggressions. Law is a traditionally male dominated and white dominated field. So there's a certain assumption that opposing counsel, not all of them, but a lot of them, have when they see me. I'm a woman, I'm brown, so they have a certain assumption of me when they see me. And with a lot of counsel, I was able to dispel that, and we actually became kind of friends and mentors even sometimes. And others, it was just, okay, they'll never like me, but I'll get through this. um, but my psychology degree helped me deal with those difficult conversations with opposing counsel, and really it helped me also notice the things that were happening to me in terms of racial and gendered microaggressions. So I was able to see, oh, this is having an impact on my mental health, right? So that was helpful as well. Um, during my articling, uh, I gave birth to my daughter. So I had a baby in the middle of articling. And within 21 days of her birth, my mom got very sick. My mom was still in Vancouver. My mom got very sick and she was hospitalized and in a coma. So I, just dropped everything, took my daughter and went over to Vancouver, spent the rest of my mom's 6 weeks there, and then she passed away. Um, so, that was a very tough time. And, I had already been facing racial and gendered microaggressions, and I had faced my first ever Islamophobic face-to-face incident that year too in Calgary. Uh, so I realized that, okay, my mental health is starting to suffer here, and I need to take a step back. If I want to be a sustainable lawyer and I want to be a single mother too, so I'm able to be the best mom and the best lawyer that I can be. So because my initial plan was, okay, yeah, I had a baby, but I'm going to keep doing the bar exam course. I'm going to take like 2 months off work, and I'm going to make sure I pass the bar on time. But when all this happened, I was like, okay, no, I can't do that. Like, that's just, I need to think about myself at this point. So I was able to advocate for myself and ask for a deferral from the people who do the bar exam course, and get that all that deferred by 6 months, so that I didn't have to do the requirements for 6 months, and my bar call was 6 months late. And the psychology degree helped in that too, because I was basically asking for an accommodation request, and I had the words, I knew the words to put in there to ask for that accommodation request. And so, and then I extended my mat leave to 5 months, which I know is still very bad. I should have taken a year. Like, looking back, I understand that, but it's just a different pressure when you're articling. So I took a 5-month mat leave instead of a 2-month mat leave. So I thankfully got called to the bar after that, and I decided to move to a different firm because the firm I was at didn't do any immigration law, and I really, really wanted to have a crack at immigration law. So I moved on to a small firm that did family, immigration, and criminal law, and I only focused on family and immigration. At that law firm as well, especially in immigration practice, actually, I saw how my psychology degree was helpful. I mean, the same family law stuff as the old firm where, dealing with emotional clients and all. But in immigration law, I remember one case specifically where it was really helpful, my background. So I was doing like an intake interview of a client who I think she didn't have status, or she was about to run out of status. And she was telling me about what she had gone through in her home country. And hearing her, I was like, I think you need to get a psychological assessment. I feel like, first of all, you're definitely like you're being persecuted in your country. Second of all, I think there's a mental health aspect to this. The other things you're describing, the flashbacks that you're getting and all of this, I think you might have PTSD or something related to PTSD. So I think you should get a psychological assessment. And so she got a psychological assessment done, and I decided to do a refugee claim for her. And in putting that refugee claim together, the way the refugee claims work is you send in disclosure to the adjudicator beforehand, so all the evidence and documents that you're going to be relying on. and then you have a hearing where you and the adjudicator question your client and get their story, and make sure that they're credible and all of that, and then the adjudicator makes a decision. So I put together a disclosure binder, not just with her evidence of what she went through, but also with that psychological assessment and with other research articles about gender-based violence and trauma and their intersections, and how trauma impacts testimony and all of that. And when I appeared at that hearing with my client, I basically just shortly said to the adjudicator that I don't think we should have my client testify. Like, if you're looking at these documents and you think these are good enough, you should just accept the claim. If you really want to deny the claim, then question my client, because the effect of this is re-traumatizing my client, and I've outlined that in all the research articles I put here. And it, my client, because my client was actually very scared about testifying. She didn't want to talk about what happened to her. So the educator, yeah, they decided in our favor, and my client didn't have to testify. She said, I'm satisfied on these documents. And basically she said to my client, welcome to Canada. So that was really a moment where I saw exactly how my psychology degree really impacted my client in a positive way. I'm sure if I didn't have a psychology degree, I would have figured it out eventually what to do in that case. But given my psychology degree, just in that first client intake interview, I knew exactly, what we should do in this case. And I was able to see the red flags where I was like, okay, I think you have PTSD, or maybe something related, some related disorder. You need to see a psychologist. So again, like, that's a huge benefit to my client. And I saw a lot of that in immigration law, where my psychology degree came very in handy. But again, my own mental health stuff actually continued, because those racial and gendered microaggressions continued from opposing counsel and sometimes from clients. And being a working mom, there was a work-life balance issue. The thing with private practice law firms, so private practice is when you work for a law firm and you have your own clients, or you work on the partner's clients too. And in-house counsel is when you're working for one company and your client is just the company, so it's not really a person. So I was in private practice, and in private practice, especially in a small firm that doesn't have the resources, I ended up having a really big work-life balance issue. So I didn't have an assistant. I had 300 files, 240 files, something like that, and I was doing the partner's files too at the same time. And I had a little baby girl, and it was just very overwhelming working from for like 12-hour days, sometimes 14-hour days, 6 days a week, and not having an assistant to help me. And the reason why I was working those hours is because I didn't have an assistant to help me with the crazy amount of files I had. So I got help for my mental health then as well, and I decided to leave private practice to find a position that's in-house or government, because from my interactions with people, I realized that those had a better work-life balance in terms of being strictly 9 to 5. And given the way my mental health was suffering and the way I was missing my daughter, I had to take action. So thankfully, around that time, the Real Estate Council of Alberta had put up a job posting for conduct counsel, and I applied for it, and here I am now. I've been at RECA for 13 months now. I still use my psychology degree here too. So the way the Real Estate Council of Alberta works is, just like the Law Society regulates lawyers' conduct, the Real Estate Council of Alberta regulates the conduct of realtors, mortgage brokers, property managers, and condo managers. And my job is to do the prosecutions when there have been breaches of the rules. And it's a very interesting job and different from private practice in the sense that I'm not just like a zealous advocate for RECA, rather I'm focusing on the public interest. So I'm focusing on protecting the public from things like fraud and incompetence of realtors and things like that. So I review files, I work with investigators, to give them legal advice when they're investigating. And then when the file gets transferred fully to me after investigation, I review through it and I make sure that there really is enough evidence to constitute a breach. And then we prosecute. My psychology degree comes in handy here because my job is usually, I'm the first person that calls up and tells a licensee that, we are pursuing these breaches against you. It's either going to go to a hearing or you can settle. And this is a sanction we're looking for. So often I might be telling people, we want to take away your license for life or take it away for a year or whatever. And that's a big thing. Like that's a big shock to a person, right? Even if they did something bad, like it's a big shock to a person emotionally, right? Your livelihood is being affected. And, like I'm able to navigate their emotions and help them. And often I've also given licensees resources where I've told them, hey, this is someone like that you can talk to Alberta Health Services crisis line, or like, because I feel like this is big news for you and you sound like you're feeling very anxious or depressed about this, so let's I want to make sure you get help and you're okay. So it helps there as well. And my mental health is doing great. Work-life balance is really good here, and I'm doing interesting work. This type of work is still administrative law. So immigration law is also administrative law, and professional discipline and regulatory law is also administrative law. Administrative law involves, dealing with administrative tribunals, as well as doing appeals, which are called judicial reviews, to the courts to review the decisions of those tribunals. And so I did that in immigration law as well, and I'm doing that here too. Yeah, so it's been great. The work-life balance has allowed me to have some more time in my life, and that's why I began my LLM, my Master's of Law, part-time. I started it last September, so very recent. And so I'm doing it at the University of Calgary, and the psychology degree also helps here. So I am focusing on applying critical race theory in the context of immigration law, and I think this is hopefully my research will be applicable to all admin law, so all of administrative law. But basically, what I'm doing is I'm looking at judicial decisions of immigration decisions, so immigration tribunal decisions, where reasonable apprehension of bias was raised, and that's a legal test, reasonable apprehension of bias. And I'm using critical race theory to analyze those cases and basically say that, my hypothesis is that that test and that judicial reasoning that comes from that test is actually silent on race. Like a lot of the decisions I've looked at so far, they'll be dealing with racial bias and they'll just not be addressing the word race, right? And that's a problem because you miss out on really more subtle forms of racism, right? So racism isn't just explicit racism. There's unconscious bias, there's stereotype threat, there's all sorts of things like that. And that's where my psychology degree comes in handy, because I know from psychology and some of the courses I took in social psychology that there's these unconscious biases that exist, and those are still racism because those are still having disproportionate impacts on racialized applicants in the immigration system. So I'm hoping to apply critical race theory. I've just started working on it because critical race theory actually brings the race into the center of the analysis. So they use discursive methods of like analyzing language and all of that to really deconstruct the reasoning to show the unstated assumptions in a decision. So that's what I'm doing. And yeah, my psychology degree helps there too, and my sociology degree actually helps there too, because I'm relying a lot on Michel Foucault's genealogical method and things like that. So all that stuff is still impacting me. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it for me. I want to give one piece of advice before we go into questions. If you are interested in law, just be your authentic self. Like, don't try to do what you think is like volunteer work that's good for law school. Just do what makes you happy, because there's so many different areas of law and there's so many different types of lawyers and different types of legal employers that you will end up where you fit. So just be yourself and definitely reach out for mentorship as well from other lawyers. can go to questions now.
Thank you so much for that, Sania, and all your insights. I'm sure it was very helpful. I definitely learned a lot today. Now we're going to open up the floor to questions. Before we move on to questions that were put in on the Qualtrics form, if you want, please put it in the chat or feel free to just chime in. I can't see any questions pop up. I think, oh, yeah, there's a question in the chat. How do you recommend reaching out to mentors?
Sure. So couple of tips for that. So the first tip is to join your province's branch. Well, I guess this is after you're in law school, but of the Canadian Bar Association. So when you end up in law school, join the Canadian Bar Association BC branch if you're going to law school in BC. The membership is free for students, and it actually has a mentorship program where you can they'll match you up with a mentor, and I did that when I was in law school. But if we're thinking about even before law school, lawyers are very social people generally, and they love to talk about themselves, as you probably can see here. So, just send them out an email. Like what I did is I would just see an interesting lawyer, and I would send them an email with a very short paragraph about myself, and then tell them that I'm interested in learning more about their practice and how they became a lawyer and their journey. Because I noticed on their profile that they did XYZ, whatever they did that piqued my interest. And like almost all the time, people would reply saying, sure, let's meet up for a coffee, right? So, just reach out. For me, it was by email just because I literally had no connections in Calgary. So I would just look people up and email them. But when I was going to school in BC as well, I would just do the same thing, actually. I would just email them. And especially now, given everything having the possibility of virtual, you can do virtual coffees with lawyers from anywhere. I mean, if you're interested in, say, moving to Ontario and are wondering about the practice of law there, reach out to a lawyer there. Yeah, and just make sure that in your email that you do show that you're not just randomly sending them an email. Like you have to show them in the email that you read up about them beforehand.
That sounds like great advice. Definitely going to start using that immediately. So we have another question about work-life balance. How did you manage to study for law school, support yourself, and still live your life? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're talking about during undergrad or during law school. I know during undergrad it was a lot easier. So I have a low socioeconomic background, so I had to work 2 jobs while I was doing my undergrad, and then I was also volunteering and studying, and I didn't balance it very well in terms of studying for the LSAT. So for the entrance exam to get in, I actually just kind of winged my LSAT, and thankfully it worked out. But I would recommend to anyone who right now wants to take the LSAT is to take an LSAT prep course. And if you can't afford to take a prep course, just get one of those LSAT prep books from the library, and every once in a while go through one of those books. They'll have like past or exam questions, and it'll teach you as well. The courses are a little bit better in teaching you how to do the exam, but the books are great as well. There's some prep courses that are online, and they're self-study, so you don't have to like go into a classroom and take an additional course. It's just something you can log into whenever you want to, and do your practice exams and watch the videos of the speakers talking. So that's one way you can maintain a little bit of balance to study for law school. In law school is very tough in terms of workload. Um, I had to scale down on my jobs a bit. I had to work one job during law school, and I also didn't volunteer at as many places, right? I volunteered at, I think, just 2 places. Um, and like the way for me to maintain that was to have a good support system. So, my mom was my main support system. She would be that person, for me to vent to if I needed to vent to, and to just, like she would cook, so I wouldn't have to cook, and I could just focus on working and studying. So, having a good support system is definitely key. Um, but another important point, and a point that I thought, like I wish I had thought of back then, is also knowing your own boundaries. So, when you're in law school and it's really tough and you see all these people, because law school is filled with amazing, smart people, you see all these people doing these amazing, smart things. And, some of them are more, like in my case, they were more privileged than me. So they didn't have to work, and they did all this interesting volunteer stuff that I didn't do, because I didn't have time to. But I knew I had to set that boundary for myself where you can't have unrealistic expectations for yourself, right? You're only one person and there's only 24 hours in the day. So you have to manage your time accordingly and prioritize what opportunities you want to choose to pursue. Um, and managing time for me now in my current practice, because law is busy, I actually hyper manage myself. Like for some people this doesn't work, but for me, scheduling everything in my calendar works for me. So I schedule like personal things in my calendar, and like I remind myself to take a break in my calendar, and things like that. Step away from the desk for 15 minutes. That has to be a reminder. So for me, just hyper scheduling also helps. It doesn't help for everyone, so I don't want to say that's like the way to do it. And then for me, again, even now, setting boundaries is a big thing, because I am very ambitious and I want to do every single thing. But I like when I have that instant reaction of, oh yeah, I want to apply for this board opportunity, I don't do it right away. I think, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm already on like 5 things. I should not do a 6th thing. Let me just scale back. So part of it is also boundaries, and then the last part of it is um, when you're working in law, and it has an issue of work-life balance, ask for support from your law firm. Like I wish I'd asked for support earlier, because if they are invested in you and they want to keep you, they're going to give you that support. So they'll hire you an assistant, or maybe they'll take some files away from you, or make things easier for you. And even in law school, ask for support. Like talk to the like I talked to a counselor a lot at UBC, because counseling is free for students. So that helped a lot for me as well. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So another question, what does articling mean?
Sure. Yeah, that's a confusing term, so I totally get it. So articling is a practicum. So the way law, getting qualified to be a lawyer works is you go to law school, you complete your Juris Doctor, so you complete your JD degree, and then you have to do a practical term working, but you're working under the mentorship and supervision of another lawyer. And that's why it's called articling, because basically what happens is lawyers have lawyers can be sued for mistakes. So when you're an articling student, the responsibility for that is your principal, the person supervising you. So you're immune to being, to having anything happen to you, and you can learn. And so different provinces have different articling types. In Alberta, we have the ability to do a whole year with one law firm, or we can break it up into composite articles. So you can do like a couple of months at one firm, a couple of months at a different firm, and things like that. But you need articling, so you have to finish your articles and pass the bar exam course to become a lawyer and be called to the bar. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, that is perfect. And another question. So you said you knew you wanted to become a lawyer since elementary school. How did this like come about? Like, what is this why behind you pursuing law?
Sure. So it was mixture of two things. So one thing was that I was very good at writing and analyzing things. And like teachers were saying to me, oh, like you should be a lawyer. You can write really well and argue really well. But really, even before that, I wanted to be a lawyer, and it was because of like things my family and myself had faced in our life. So um, I grew up low socioeconomic status, dealt with food insecurity. So, not being able to feed myself, parents not being able to have food uh, for a brief period, and housing insecurity. So all of that stuff got me really interested in social justice and what can be done to change society. And I really felt like law is an instrument of power. Law is this thing that shapes everything in society. So even at that young stage in elementary school, I was like, the law is a very important thing, and if it's used in the right way or it's reformed or whatever, things can be better for people who are from marginalized backgrounds. Um, and also my parents are immigrants, so that's why immigration law was just always a thing for me, where I was like, I want to help people, you know, get status in Canada, refugee cases, things like that. So that's where the initial interest came. And then the family law interests started more when I was volunteering during my undergrad at the West Coast Legal and Education Action Fund. And I saw like family law being really interesting too, and a really interesting way to help women, particularly. So that's where that interest came. But the initial interest was just from life experiences.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions in the chat as of right now. So we can move on to the questions on the slides. So how did you decide on your career path after undergrad? I think you already touched upon this, so if you want to give a little.
Yeah,
Um,
I already touched on it. Because I guess I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I guess undergraduate just I was able to decide um, what area of law I wanted to go into based on the volunteer experiences I had, and based on those and based on my psychology degree, I was like, I want to do family and immigration law. I did wish that I hadn't self-selected myself out of big firms. So the way law school works is, or at least in Vancouver, there's these summering positions that pop up at big firms, and everyone interviews for them, and if you get in, that's great. You have an into a big firm as a summer student, and then hopefully as an articling student, and hopefully as a lawyer there. I self-selected myself out of that process. I didn't apply to any big firms, didn't do any of those interviews, and I just focused on applying for government jobs, and then for small to medium-sized firm jobs, because I had this view in my mind that big law firms don't have work-life balance and that I wouldn't fit in a big law firm culture. And I think that's just self-selecting myself out, and I should have tried it at least. As a first-generation lawyer with no guidance, I feel like that was a mistake I made. Like, I feel like I should have at least tried it. Because I mean, work-life balance was an issue anyways in small and medium firms. So and then for the government jobs I applied to, I really want to go to government, but it just didn't work out at that time. I would get to the second stage of the process and not make it through. But now I'm in a quasi government type of position, because the Real Estate Council of Alberta is like an arm of the minister. It's like an agency set up by the minister to regulate realtors. So I guess I kind of am doing it. But yeah, so I really wanted a certain type of career, but I ended up with a different type of career, if that makes any sense. Just things happened.
yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I'm so glad that you're doing what you actually like to do. And yeah, second question. What is it like being a lawyer? What does a typical day in your life look like?
Sure. So since I've worked in both private practice and now in-house, I can actually speak from both angles. So when I was in private practice, the way my day looked is it really depended on the day. So, it depended on what was scheduled in my calendar in the day, whether I had any court appearances that day, or whether I had lots of client meetings that day. Usually the day began with court, because in Alberta, family court is morning chambers. So like for small court applications, you show up in the morning and do them. So I would be in court in the mornings, and then I would I would do all my emails, responding to my clients, do any client consultations for new clients. And then I would end up not even beginning my work until like the evening. And then near the evening, I would start working on like writing my briefs, doing my legal research, putting together evidence binders and things like that. And it was a little bit chaotic because the areas of law I did practice in, family and immigration law, often had an emergency aspect to them. So I could have had a plan to do something one day, and then, I would get a call from a client that, they're in danger and they need to, have an emergency protection order because, their spouse, is abusive, and an incident has happened, and now they want to be able to stay in the home and get an emergency protection order so that the spouse is out. So, then I would like urgently do that, and drop everything else that I was doing. Or like an immigration case, like a client who is out of status, and I'm applying for their humanitarian grounds application, they might be served with a removal order or a removal date all of a sudden, or the CBSA, the Canadian Border Services Agency, showed up to their door and detained them, or something. Something happened, and I just have to drop everything and run to that client or run to the CBSA office and deal with it. So there was sometimes no way to plan your day because you would just end up with emergencies. But it was exciting and fun too, actually. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot of skills out of it. It was very, very interesting work. But yeah, it was usually very late evening work. Now, in-house, it's similar in the sense that the day depends on what's in the calendar. So if I have to go into court or if I have to do a hearing, that's different. But if I don't have to, then a regular day would be I answer my emails in the morning, I take any calls from investigators or licensing or the communications team at RICA on any legal advice that they need related to conduct proceedings. And then I start working on my files. So I'll do my document review. If I'm working on something where I'm drafting submissions, I'll do the submissions. If I have to call up a licensee to give them bad news of, us, going ahead with our prosecution, I usually do that near the end of the day so that it's not like ruining their entire day. So I usually do those calls around like 3 or 4 p.m. So that way, they don't have to be at the office stressing about that the whole day. So I'll end my day with that. And if I have a hearing, usually that whole week I just spend preparing only for that hearing. So because I have the gift of time in this workplace, I can do that, where I can just spend a whole week just reviewing for one hearing and not doing anything else. Back in private practice, it wasn't like that. It was, you had to manage multiple things. So you could have several hearings in a week and just be preparing for all of them at the same time. So yeah, that's what the typical day looks like. Yeah, sorry, that's my daughter.
Hi.
Sure, you want to go back to bed?
She's so cute.
Thanks. All right, next question.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That sounds really exciting as well as hectic. So the third question, as a psychology major, what are some skills or experiences I can acquire to get a head start in my law career?
Sure. So as I touched on, you shouldn't really focus on doing the exact right type of thing to get into law school. Like I know with me, I didn't take any political science courses, and everyone kept saying to me, "You have to take poli-sci if you want to get into law," which was not the case. But you can do things that you enjoy, so you get good marks in your courses, but also any volunteer work or any even paid work that you do is helpful. Anything that will show that you're developing your problem solving skills, you're developing your verbal communication or even your written communication skills, and you're dealing with the public. So you're dealing with, managing different people or managing your workload even. All of that is great. So, when you're getting into law school, in the application process, you have to write at least to UBC, you have to write a personal statement. And so in that personal statement, then you can highlight, how your volunteering and work experiences set you apart and how that impacts your interest in law and makes you a good lawyer a good future lawyer. So don't focus on like specific types of volunteering or specific types of work, but do volunteering and work if you can, or just even volunteering if you can, so that you have something to show that you're a well-rounded person and that you have those analytical skills and those communication skills. Even like working as a waitress, that's great. Like those are really great skills that you're gonna get from that. Like anything really, just do something. Don't just study only. That's all what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
That's definitely great advice. So can you expand on how you apply critical race theory in admin law and whether it impacts sentencing outcomes?
Sure. So I can explain that further. So sentencing is more criminal law, and my focus is on administrative law. So administrative law is composed of many different areas of law. So immigration law, employment law, human rights, all of that. And what sets administrative law as administrative law is that you deal with not just like going to court. Like in criminal, you just go to provincial court and you deal with criminal cases. In administrative law, you often have to appear at administrative tribunal hearings, or you have to deal with administrative decisions. So like decisions from the executive, I guess, of the government, and you then you have the option to appeal those at judicial review. If it's a federally legislated thing, it goes to federal court. If it's a provincial thing, it goes to the provincial superior court. So in Alberta, that's the Alberta Queen's Bench for judicial review. And judicial review focuses on like if there's an error in law or if the decision by the administrative decision maker was unreasonable. For example, their reasons didn't have proper grounding or things like that, or if there's a procedural fairness or natural justice issue, or if there's a bias issue too. So there's this test called the reasonable apprehension of bias test that is applied by judges. It's used in criminal law and administrative law. And basically it looks at whether there was a reasonable, like when you look at the decision of the administrative decision maker that's being appealed, whether from those reasons you see, or even from the comments of the decision maker, you see that there's a reasonable apprehension of bias, such that a reasonably informed person would see that and say, oh yeah, that's biased decision, basically. That's what the test is. The problem, and the reason why I'm applying critical race theory to this, and this has been documented by sociolegal scholars, is that in judicial decision making, just because of the overly focus on being impartial and neutral, judges don't use the word race and they don't discuss the racial underpinnings of these cases. And what happens from that is that racial bias ends up being missed when this reasonable apprehension of bias test is being applied. And also, it just leads to unequal outcomes really for racialized people. And it also misses out on racism that's not like the most explicit form of racism. So it misses out on a decision maker having an unconscious bias against the applicant, or having using stereotypes that are underpinning their reasoning process. So that's a problem, and that's why critical race theory can be used. And the way I intend to use it and am using it is, reviewing the judicial decisions, but also reviewing the underlying administrative decision makers' decisions and applying critical race theory and seeing how the judge's decision is missing out on race. And then hopefully from all those case studies that I'll do, I'll be able to propose an expansion to the reasonable apprehension of bias test that's sensitive to race, that actually has because I feel like judges will have to be told, you have to look for this, these are all things to look at. And so if, we can add that to the test, then it'll become more sensitive to race and there won't be, these type of outcomes. For example, in one of the research articles I read, they were talking about a case where the students had launched this was an American case, the students had launched a human rights complaint against their, I think, university. And when the judge was citing the facts, the judge talked about, the students being involved in a widespread disturbance and this and that. And nowhere in the decision was it mentioned that the widespread disturbance was a Black History Month protest. So, that just missed the whole thing of what was happening in that case, right? Or there was another case, and this is a criminal case, R.V. Smithers, where the Smithers basically, I think he ends up attacking or beating up someone, and in that decision, the decision maker misses out, the judge misses out basically on talking about all of the testimony that Smithers gave of the racism he was facing, and what led to this happening, and that needs to be acknowledged too, right? So you can't just erase race, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what got me into doing this for my thesis. It's in very early stages. I'm still in my at the end of my first year of my master's, but it's been really exciting reading all the articles about this stuff and noticing that there is a silence on actually applying critical race theory to immigration law in the way that I'm going to be doing. So it's very exciting for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. We are it is already 11, so I do want to be mindful of your time. So we do have a couple more questions, but I think we're gonna end it here. And I'd like to give a very, very big thank you to you for the insightful presentation and excellent answers to the questions. I'm sure it was really helpful to all our audience, both present right now and the ones that are going to be watching it later. We really appreciate the time you've taken to share your experiences as a lawyer with us, and we look forward to collaborating with you again in the future. I would also like to thank all the students that are present right now, asking questions and showing your support for the series. And also thank you to our SciGuys marketing and leadership teams for making this event possible. And if you are a viewer of the recording later, we would love to have you present at our next installment of the Expert Talk series. But yeah, have a great day, everyone.